room. Now that we're at the end of the book tour, we can talk about stuff we couldn't have done if we'd started out early. So it's great. This is his new book, I Will Find You, which debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and probably in the UK in the Sunday Times list, right?
We'll find out.
Oh, it's not quite there yet?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
I haven't heard, so.
This is so old hat to Harlan. I mean,
It's never old hat.
It's never gone #1. It's always exciting.
It's always, you never take it for granted. It's always a wonderful thing. And I'm very grateful, and it's an honor, really. Never gets old.
Well, we did our part, but we still have some autographed copies, which Harlan very kindly did for the Poison Pen, that you can still order. So if you got to this book late, it's not too late to get one from us. So Harlan, when we first talked about this, or rather when your publicist and I did, he was saying you were going to do an East Coast live tour and otherwise virtual, but I didn't realize he'd expanded East Coast all the way to the UK. So you're just back from London, according to Instagram.
Yeah, two different publishers, as you know, and I haven't toured either spot in 4 years. I think you were one of the stores I was supposed to go to in March of 2020 when yep. I canceled the tour. We canceled the tour literally the day the book came out. Was around like the day we started we were closing down. Within days, it was March of 2020. So March of 2019 was my last tour, and I think I didn't even do the UK that year. So both the Americans and the British asked if I would do in-person tours, which I was a little not COVID nervous about, but you start locking yourself in your room in your house and stuff like that. It was weird feeling to get back out. So we wanted to keep the travel as little as possible. So we kept it on the East Coast in the US. And then when I finished in Boston, the night I finished my last event in Boston, I ran to the airport, jumped on an Aer Lingus flight over to Dublin and started doing the UK side of it.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, you obviously are an important author over there. And isn't some of the television, because I was going to ask you, because you have this roster of stuff being televised, isn't a lot of that a UK production company?
Yeah, well, I work with, one of my partners is a UK production company. We've done some really fun shows, The Stranger, Stay Close, Safe, The Five. And now when I was over there, I visited the set when I was in Manchester for the newest one, which is Fool Me Once, which we're filming right now in Manchester. Again, the same creative team that I've done those other shows with for Netflix. That one will be out. And so I was able to kill two birds with one stone by visiting the set and saying hi to everybody there, and then doing my event that night.
You do any like sneaky Alfred Hitchcock sort of appearances in your TV shows?
I have. I stopped doing them a little bit just because they started to become expected, and who wants that? Yeah. So, but I did one in The Stranger, and then during Stay Close, it was COVID. So they go into a woman's house who is a amateur, one of the sort of amateur pink private eye detectives, that sort of do things on their own. And she has her own murder board up, and one of the suspects is a photograph of me. That was how I did my cameo for Stay Close.
I love that. Wow.
Yeah, it's cute.
It is. So do you think that, all of the TV dramas have increased your book sales? Because that is always the hope that it will translate to books.
I don't know. I mean, certainly not like dramatically. Because I do think there's also, probably there's some people who, they're very separate things. And there's some people who will just say, oh, I'll just read, I don't need to read the book. I can watch the series. So the answer is I really don't know. I haven't seen a gigantic spike one way or the other, going down or up in that way. So I don't think so. As I get older, I try to pay less and less attention to those kind of details. They're going to fall into place. I don't really check reviews anymore. I don't check Amazon rankings. I am thrilled to, by the New York Times, ranking, whatever. But outside of that, I don't really I try to stay away from the minutia and those details more and more as I get older, because I've also learned they're irrelevant as a writer. My job is to write the best story I can, and then not worry how people consume it or where or what I'm doing there. If I'm doing poorly, I'm sure someone will tell me, and go from there.
I think you're very wise. It saves a lot. At least as Catalini was saying yesterday that she obsessively reads her reviews. And I thought to myself, why? Because so many of them are based upon non-book kinds of, external things.
I think for Lisa, maybe because she's taking on a new direction with some of the historical fiction she's doing now. So you're curious when you make such a dramatic change, are people going to accept it or not? But at this stage, my publisher told me it's, on Goodreads or whatever, it's 4.6. And as long as it's still between 4 and 5, I'm not panicked about. They all seem to rank about the same. They all seem to have that kind of thing. This one seems to be a little special. I mean, it does seem the response has been a little more positive maybe than I've heard the last few books, but I never know if that's just my perception versus what reality is.
Well, sometimes it depends on what the plot turns on. And, since you're a dad, with beautiful children and a long marriage and so forth, I think, you're writing from the heart when you talk about dads or mothers and children, about children in jeopardy or families that are. And so this book, the idea that a father could have murdered his child and is now serving time for it, and maybe that isn't what happened, that can really resonate with people.
I hope so. I mean, I think it's a compelling, idea, I hope. And more so than most books, I think it probably is my fastest pace. I mean, it really shoots out. The first line is, like you said, I'm spending the 5th year of a life sentence for murdering my own child. Spoiler alert, I didn't do it. And then his sister-in-law comes and shows him a photograph, and there's a boy in the background that they're both convinced is his son somehow still alive. And so he has to break out of prison. And, there are nods to Count of Monte Cristo and Fugitive and things like that. And so, there's some roller coasters, most roller coasters, you kind of go up slowly and then there's a big drop. And then there's those, I don't know if you've seen it or people know it, like Disney World and some others. There's those new ones where they just shoot you out like a gun. I'd say this is the second one. This is shoot you out like a gun roller coaster.
So way back in your, was it Just One Look, the French drama? That's the way I think about it. Is that the right title?
Tell No One was a French drama, No Second Chance, and Just One Look have all been French dramas.
Tell No One, right. Yeah. But in Tell No One, there was a sort of same, everybody had accepted a truth, and then a photograph or something came along and disrupted, the ideas that everybody had. I was thinking about, we've been talking about AI a lot. Do you think that AI is going to enter into your plots, that, you could wind up with some kind of a situation where it wasn't a real photograph, but a doctored one? And where would that go?
Yeah, I mean, I've done stuff like that. So in the past with Photoshops and things like that, I always try to reflect whatever technology is going on, because my books take place in the present day. Mm-hmm. So, years ago, when you and I first met and I was doing the early Myron Bolitar books, when Myron and Wynn would separate, Myron would call Wynn on his cell phone and Wynn would listen in. And that was considered huge cutting edge technology when we started. Now I might as well have 2 cans and a string. So, if you're writing a book in the present day now, and you're going on a date, you're Googling the person. Everybody does. And to not do it is sort of unrealistic. So I just reflect whatever's going on. I don't know how that AI stuff may fit in or may not fit in, but we'll see, just whatever.
Yeah. I'm afraid we're all going to see, because
the
word is that it's, I was paying no attention to it, but my husband's had a complicated medical diagnosis for his spine, which seems to be crumbling.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, I am too. And, but fortunately, it's an orthopedic issue that can largely be fixed. But my point is, he couldn't understand the medical, they tell you on Mayo Patient Portal, they give you the results. And Rob couldn't, it was like, what is this? So he went to chat, whatever it is, and had the chat thing, the AI take the medical language and reduce it to something that somebody other than your lovely wife could actually understand at home. And I thought that was a useful, useful thing to have that kind of translation.
That's interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about that.
Well,
But look, all these technologies have good and bad. They seem to be getting worse as time goes on, where you reach a stage where it's becoming, and in my view, less interesting to write about, quite frankly. I mean, if nothing is real, then nothing is fake, and it becomes really, you can't believe anything. So, the moments when I've had just one look I did of a photograph, I've had videos, I've had whatever, but if the answer is always anybody could fake anything fully,
right.
I'll probably leave that altogether, because that won't be as interesting.
No, it really won't be. So as a dad, do you think that when, this kind of you're really good about writing, reliably on schedule. I can't remember a year. Maybe there was one when you haven't produced a book. I mean, you've just
Not yet. Knock wood of all kinds.
Well, you've been incredible in the 30 some years that I've known you. You just hardly ever missed a beat. And I haven't counted, but there's a long, long list, which I can show you in my advanced reading copy, of all the books that Harlan has written. So, I don't want to ask you where you get ideas, because that's so boring, but are you sparked off by something that feels personal? Is it something you read about? What is it that gives you, because you have to be going from one book, transitioning immediately into writing another one to keep up this work pace?
Well, it usually takes me a couple months to come up with the idea. My default position is to think about what ifs and trying to come up with stories out of normal, everyday places. Though in this case, I actually just thought of that sentence first, the idea of a man in prison already for 5 years for killing his own son. And what if he didn't do it? And what if that? And then I said to myself, well, that's not really enough. If he didn't do it and he can prove himself innocent, then he gets out of prison, his kid is still dead. So, I talk about in the first page that no matter what, he didn't really fight that hard, because metaphorically, he's in prison anyway, right? If his kids. So how can I find fuller redemption for him? And I play around with that for a while, and then eventually, hopefully, answers start to come with me. And then sometimes the ideas start someplace goofy. The book before this, The Match, for example, I was hiking, and this is what I mean by anything. I was hiking in the woods with my family. And I know hiking is really in right now, but I hate hiking. I don't get it. I mean, I like walking through city streets. I like window shopping. I like walking through bookstores like your own. I like seeing other people's faces. But walking through, I'm like, oh, great, there's a tree. There's another tree. There's another tree. Where's this? There's a restaurant. It's hot out here. There's bugs. I'm getting bitten by mosquitoes. So I'm hiking through the woods of Ramapo, New Jersey, and whining like this at my family. And I spot a little boy walking on a parallel path, kid maybe 5 or 6 years old, walking by himself. So I go, what if? What if this kid came out of the woods right now and said, he's always lived in these woods. He remembers no life before it. He's broken into cabins or lived off the land, almost Tarzan-like, but remembers no parents. And what if 30 years pass and we still don't have any idea how this kid's gotten in the woods? And now he matches on a DNA test and he can get the answer, and it's totally shocking. So these are some of the ways that I've come up with ideas for books recently, anyway.
You obviously have a curious brain, but over the years you must have honed it in to look at a situation and go, what if, in a way that somebody other than you might just ignore.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot, for every what if it's almost like I was comparing it to the human being being inseminated. So there's a million, I have a million little ideas that come floating in, and maybe one survives and gets into the egg. So most of the what ifs that pop up into my head go nowhere. And then some go someplace, so maybe from that I would go, okay, well, how can this be that this guy is in prison and someone was murdered that night and he's arrested for it? Well, how can this answer be? And I'll come up with the answer. And then sometimes if I have the answer, now is that enough that I want to write a whole book with it? Is it going to be enough to sustain an entire novel and be really interesting to you, the reader, and me, the writer. And that's sort of the final stage of, to change metaphors, the tiered lottery, right? 1 out of 50, then you win that lottery, you have to get another 1 out of 50, and then more like 1 out of 10 to get to that final thing where now you are the novel I'm going to write. And that process usually takes 2 to 3 months.
Well, it's true. You're going to have to live with it for several months once you conceive it. And it's also true that it's disappointing for the reader and probably for you if the ending isn't as good as the beginning. You know,
I work very hard on my
endings. Yeah, it's a lot easier to start a book with a great idea than it is to finish it. So do you have to, I like what you were saying. You sort of have to stick more than one if together so if they clump. And then you can see that the ending actually will be as good as the beginning, because it's very true. If the guy is sitting there in jail and his kid is dead, he hasn't got any reason to, think about anything other than just serving his time.
Right.
Maybe
so that's part. I mean, that's big. That's a big sort of part of it. And also, it's oftentimes 3 or 4 ideas that end up in a book. Yeah. If I'll come up with other stuff while I'm writing. I wanted to do something about a guy's childhood in Revere, Massachusetts. I wanted to make a little commentary on some of the funnier retirement villages down in Florida. There's a lot of things I kind of want to do, and then it's fitting it in the story. When I wrote Win, which is 2 books ago, I wanted to do something like the Gardner Museum heist, where they still haven't found the Rembrandts and the Vermeers that went missing. So that was one thing. And then I wanted to do a story about, what if they found they had actually done this a little bit. They found a hoarder when somebody died who was somewhat famous in a building in Manhattan. So, well, how can I turn that into a story? And I also wanted to write about 60s radicals like the Weather Underground. I wanted to write about a kidnapping case like the Patty Hearst case. So all of that ended up in Win, all of it, which could have maybe been 3 or 4 different novels, but all of it came together to be one big story for Win. So that it always works a little differently. But I think if there's there's a fair criticism, if you will, of me, is that I have a lot of plot and I have a lot of twists, and that's fair. But that's because any idea I come up with while I'm writing it usually I don't save. It's not like I'm a bot. I look at it's not like I can save it like money to spend another time. I look at it more like I'm a boxer, and if I don't throw the punch while I'm in the ring now, it just goes to waste. So everything that I come up with ends up somehow in the book.
I never think of you as being too plot heavy. I mean, it's not like your characters are just cardboard sitting around acting out, whatever task you've given them.
Oh God, no, I hope not.
No, not at all. But, here's the question that's come up a fair amount lately, and partly because at least one major publisher has made a decision about pricing books. If it stays under X number of pages, it's going to be one price. And if it exceeds it, it's going to jack it up another $250 or something. I think this is relating in part to the expanded cost of paper. But the consequence is that some authors from this publisher I've talked to have really started seriously wondering about the length of their books. Do they want to cut it down so they fall into the lower price category, which is going to be more attractive to readers? So I guess, a legitimate question would be, how do you know how long the book needs to be? Does it vary with the story? Are you just so used to getting to, whatever it is, 100 and some thousand words, that you have like an automatic brake that kicks in and says, okay, this is enough words, I'm going to wrap it up? How does that work?
It does. It is a feel thing. I mean, I never really worry about word count. And that naturally I'm right there. I mean, sometime I'll be, okay, you're at 65,000 words or whatever. It's time to start turning for home, something like that maybe. But most of it's a feel thing with me. I've never once had to say, ooh, I got to pad it a little bit because I'm short. And I don't think I've ever said, let's wrap it up fast because I'm getting long. I've never had that pressure you're talking about, which would be really depressing to me if I had to do that. So they always end up coming between, 90 to 110,000 words. But it's pretty much it's natural at this stage of the game. But there is a stage where I kind of go, okay, you're at this stage of the story. It's probably time to start at least turning for home. So it's that long journey I've talked about before, where the book starts in New Jersey, it ends in LA. I may go via the Suez Canal, stop in Tokyo, or drive through Scottsdale and say hi to you. But somewhere around Scottsdale, I'll sort of say, oh, now I got to start turning and heading more directly for LA.
Well, you've clearly honed, your sense of pace after writing so many books. I mean, a thriller, after all, has to move quickly compared to other forms of fiction. So, yeah, I imagine it's just become instinctual with you.
Yep.
It's an interesting thought. I feel for first novelists who have to sort of work this out by themselves, or have an editor who goes, that's not needed in this book. Or, it used to come up when I was editing a lot of books. One of the things I always really enjoyed is I'd be reading along and, there'd be something happening and there was no real basis for it. And I would say to the author, why is this here? Or what's going on? And they would tell me. And then I would say, but why didn't you write it into the book? So sometimes, sometimes it goes wrong because the author's got it in his head, or hers, and doesn't get it out on the page, as opposed to all the repetitions that, an editor can scissor out. Are you good at that? Do you go back and edit your books and, see that maybe you've repeated some information more than the one time or two times that's needed?
I'm a brutal editor.
Are you?
No editor I've ever had has been as brutal on me as I've been on me. So every book, this is something that I do when I'm writing. This is sort of I don't know if it's a tip, but it's something I do. So I create a file called spare. And so if I'm not sure if I should keep the section in or something in, I'll cut it out and I'll put it in spare so I could always put it back. And if the book is 500 pages long, spare is usually around 50 pages, maybe 50 to 100 pages. I've written that this is my 35th book, believe it or not. And to date, I've never once put anything back. Not once.
Wow, really?
Not once. So my point is that you can always cut more than you think. It's a hard thing. I don't know if it was Hemingway or Faulkner who said, kill all your darlings. It's been given credit. Dorothy Parker. I don't know who said it, because we always change around who said it. And it's really good advice. I'm learning it's true a lot with TV as well, that there's always places you can cut, and doesn't mean you're cutting themes or character development or any of those, but things can be really honed in a way that actually makes those things more powerful, makes the character and themes and the things that make a novel and not just a roller coaster work, but everything has to be honed. I try not to waste a word. We have the famous Elmore Leonard quote, I try to cut out all the parts you'd normally skip. Greatest piece of writing advice of all time.
We just recently found Ted Lasso. Don't ask me why I'm so far behind, but maybe because I'm reading. And I've noticed in that show, they really don't waste any time. They hit their mark and then that's it. They move right on. The transitions are relatively fast. And I think that might be one reason it has been. I've only seen season 1 and I don't want to know how the rest of it goes. I want to watch it. But I was impressed with the technique that they use. Is sort of like a zinger and then a zinger and then a zinger, but they're not wasting your time. I have one I want to recommend to you, which is one of the best things I think I've seen in years. It's called Extraordinary Attorney Woo. It's South Korean. And I'm telling you, Harlan, it's 16 episodes. It's absolutely astonishing. The woman in it is autistic, and yet she has fought her way through to getting a law degree. And she arrives at this law firm for various reasons I won't go into, and nobody knows how to cope with her, and she isn't too sure how to do it. And if I tell you there are whales that appear on a regular basis in The Odd Dolphin, but I'm serious. Scott Turow and I, when I did this book launch last May, first thing Scott and I talked about was Extraordinary Attorney Woo. It was like
Extraordinary Attorney Woo.
Attorney Woo.
And what streamer is this on?
I think it's Netflix, but honest to God, I've never seen anything quite like it. And since you are doing so much television, you might find it interesting. It has a way of combining some technology, the whales just are part of the story, and they don't feel weird or contrived. And I really like that. a lot. So let's talk about the prison break. You know, when you go to do something like that, do you just make that stuff up, or do you actually consult anybody about how is it that somebody could successfully stage, as the man here, the father, does in this book, how to stage a prison break? And what kind of reaction do you get if you ask for help?
I'm not, as you and I've told this in the past, I'm not a big researcher.
Right.
You're really looking for a guide to how to break out of prison, probably not your guy. So most of it, I hope it reads plausibly, but I mean, I think that's most of it I've made up. I have actually run it by some people who were in the business, and they didn't have major issues with it. So I take that as common, but I'm not, there's a couple of, what they would call action set pieces in this book. That one, and there's one in New York City, especially those two. And I'm not an action fan. I don't like action movies. I find them pretty boring for the most part. I'm not into the Marvel or the comic book things. So when I write them, I really write them very internally. It's really, I'm hoping, like, when he's almost getting caught and he's trying to get out, that your heart is in your throat for him. But doing that with internal stuff rather than watching it externally, which doesn't really interest me. It's what he feels. So I want to take you, the reader, and put you in that prison, trying to get out with him. And I think I'm hoping that's why that scene, has gotten a lot of comments and reads so excitedly. It's a fairly extended scene for me in terms of action, but it's also, which every scene should do, it's also developing character, how he reacts to it, how he feels about it. And it's developing plot by getting out, how he gets out, all that stuff is having more than one. It's a good rule if you're trying to write. If you can have the scene do more than one thing, it's going to be a better scene. If you're doing dialogue information dump, so to speak, do it in a way that's also going to tell me something about that character, tell me something about that circumstance, tell me something other than just that information.
Well, one of the things it has to tell you is, instead of wasting his time on bitterness, he's moving forward as fast as he can. Once he thinks that maybe his son is actually still alive. I mean, he knew all along he didn't actually commit the crime,
right?
But it's another thing to have the motivation to move forward to try to resolve the whole thing. So really, without the idea that the child might still be alive, it wouldn't work, would it? He'd still just sit there.
Well, that's the idea. I wanted, again, it's a slightly different character. It's not a man who's trying to prove his innocence,
right?
Like in The Fugitive or in The Count of Monte Cristo. In The Count of Monte Cristo, they want to seek revenge and get out. Here, he has a chance, a full redemption and hope that his son might actually still be alive. And so innocence is almost second, proving his innocence. Well, it is second. So that's the whole goal. And I'm hoping, the reaction has been really positive. I don't think I've ever had readers read a book so fast. Judging by the response from the people that I've heard from on the road, a lot of them had already read the book or read it very, very quickly. It's always my job. I mean, I always want to be that guy that you take the book to bed tonight and you stay up all night reading it. But I think this one may have done that a little better than some of the other ones.
When you talk, he doesn't have to prove he's innocent. If he can find his son, he couldn't have done the crime.
That's it, right? One would certainly lead to another, but the motivation, I should say, is not, I can get out of prison.
Right.
Right. So, and I just thought it would also be it's really an emotional story, and to be emotional moments. For example, he was married and the kid had a mother. The mother has since moved on with her life. It's been 5 years and remarried and is pregnant again. Imagine how her life is going to blow up when he breaks out of prison and says, the reason I did it is because I think our child is still alive. So and from the beginning, when I'm starting to write the book, I'm like, wow, I can't wait to get to that scene. It doesn't happen until 2/3 of the way through the novel, maybe, I don't remember. But those sort of moments you start thinking about beforehand, that's going to be really cool. And is he going to visit his father who's ill? Is he going to visit his old hometown? Is he going to see old friends? And how are they all going to react to this possibility? Or does he even tell them? And this is how you start developing a novel.
So your books are written for, basically, you're American, you're writing in America for an American audience, and yet you have this terrific UK audience. And, the British are different in many ways. So why do you think they translate so easily to drama and to readers in England?
Well, my biggest country in terms of population, is France. The French. I'm the Jerry Lewis of crime fiction. For some reason, I keep yelling at my German publisher. I want to be David Hasselhoff of publishing, but I'm one of the, I guess I'm lucky to say this, I'm one of the few best-selling writers who actually sells more books overseas than I do on U.S. soil. And I don't know. I mean, I hope it's because the books work and there's something universal in it. What I've learned is there is something universal in the specific. The more I am, New Jersey based or wherever I'm doing this particular book, I'm in that prison in Maine and then Revere, Massachusetts, and New York City. The more I'm specific and don't say, I got to appeal to my Bulgarian audience, I better make it every town USA, the more the appeal will be universal. In the case of New Jersey, we see that with, I call it the 3 S's, Sinatra, Springsteen, and The Sopranos. So there's something universal. And what I've really enjoyed about the Netflix relationship is that they've let me also take these stories and transport them to other countries. And I think that hybrid has made the story stronger. If I just did the stories straight, each one, first of all, I think the worst adaptations just stay slavishly devoted to text. I just think that's a mistake. But the fact that I've been able to do Spanish shows, Polish shows, French shows, in foreign languages, as you were pointing out, with your Inspector Wu show, a lot of the best stuff's coming from overseas, just as we've seen in our novels, the novels that you sell in your store, where 20 or 30 years ago, 99.9% were Americans, and then the Scandies started to come in, and Italians and some others, and that makes it stronger. And the same thing with TV, I think now, that gives us a little bit different flavor. And I've been really lucky to be in the forefront of a lot of that with Netflix and what Netflix has really done to bring international TV. When was the last time, the biggest show, I think, in Netflix history is Squid Games. There's no way a South Korean show would have been watched by Americans 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Right.
So that's or the show you're just talking about.
Yeah.
So I think that means that we Americans, if we're doing American shows, have to up our game. We can't rely, and the same thing goes with crime fiction novels. As these new people were coming in, Joe Nesbo and all the rest of these guys that were coming in from Scandinavia, for example, at first, it meant that we had to up our game, which is great. I think that any new development, the more that we have, not diversity for diversity's sake, but these more diverse authors are coming in with great stuff and new and different. And so all of us have to up our game.
Well, that's true. Crime fiction, mysteries, we might have originally called it, but I like the broader term, was really a British and American construct at the outset. So, 33 years ago, when I first opened the store, we sold all kinds of American written books to foreign countries. I love the fact that we have such a big global audience. I mean, there are going to be people watching you that, you didn't tour, they might not get to see you otherwise. And so, if I went to, I can still remember when I went to Australia the first time and went into a bookstore in Sydney, the whole crime fiction section was American. And I might add, spectacular prices. It's like $35 for a paperback. Yeah. Why is anybody even buying books there? And now look at how Australia, which is also English language, but that's not really the point, has developed, serious writers of their own. And they're creating kind of an Australian crime wave in the way that the Scandinavians did when they first come in. So we're seeing, writers in India, we're seeing writers in all kinds of countries have embraced this form of fiction and are now writing it locally. And then it gets translated, or, maybe some of them write in English. I often wonder when our books go overseas, because they do every day. I'm always fascinated looking at the places. I have 3 people trained to ship books internationally because it's hard. You have to do all these all this other stuff. And I was watching Ian this morning, and he's got a book going to Denmark, and he's got a book going to Jakarta, and he's got a whatever. And I wonder, are they buying the books to read them, or because they probably now translated into their own language, are they buying them to keep, like artwork or something, a signed Harlan Coben book? I love his books and I read him in my native Romanian. But look, I can have an autographed copy, of a Harlan Coben book because he might never come to Bucharest. And, I find that completely fascinating. I had no idea that the business would go in that direction. I mean, you just have to follow it, right? But I remain amazed that Scottsdale has become this kind of hub, of international crime. And I think I never thought that would happen. I mean, you just have to kind of follow along and see how it's going. And I love the fact that Zoom and we stream all our live events, so they're always online. I find it absolutely wonderful that we get, fan letters from all over the world saying, I was so excited. I got to see Harlan, here I am. In fact, I wrote something in one of your Instagram posts when you said you were in London, and there were all kinds of people who were sad, you didn't come here. I wish you'd come to Cambridge or whatever. So I wrote and said, you can watch our conversation anytime you want, either live or whenever it happens to suit you. And I think this technology, Harlan, is so wonderful that it's bringing, even more globalization, if you want to call it, or more readers together or more communities together to talk about fiction. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the positive we were talking about before of technology. That's certainly one of the positives, that the world becomes smaller in that way, and that you can reach out and see people. During COVID, I did events with, a lot of people that were hard to get in the same room with it. John Grisham, I did one with Lee Child and Michael J. Fox and Anna Quinlan. And it's just, interesting to see the variety of people you can do it with. But yeah, well, it's all good.
It is all good. And, also you're not policing a crowd. So it's much more relaxed. I'm not sitting there wondering, if somebody's going to fall off their chair or their phone's going to go off, or, 8 people will rise up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the most crucial question or something. It's much more relaxed. So do you think, going all the way back here, that the fact that you are writing about mostly, not always with Win and whatever, but mostly kind of ordinary people in extraordinary situations, makes them work, no matter what the country or community is? You're not constrained by police procedure or, that kind of thing. I mean, right here, we have a dad, who is devastated by the murder of his son. He's sitting in prison. Suddenly he finds out maybe he can do something about it. He's not a cop. He's not a Marvel superhero. He's just a guy, right?
Yeah, a lot of what I do is the Hitchcockian ordinary man, the extraordinary circumstance, or woman, depending on the book. And I do think there's a lot of appeal to that. I also think that people aren't all that different. That, a lot of the books I write about sort of involve the American dream and moving out to the burbs and getting a house with a picket fence and 2.4 kids and all of that. And you realize that's sort of the dream all around the world. And so we all relate to that. We all relate to family. We all, relate to these sort of circumstances. And I do think that's probably part of the appeal. I don't know, just thank goodness for what the appeal is. But I think I think you're onto something there, that I think that sort of suburban angst what I'm always amazed is whenever I go overseas and they always ask me these questions and think it's like an American situation, where I was like, no, you guys are the same. And that we're much more alike than we are different.
So one of the things that I notice, I do watch you on Instagram from time to time, and besides, I've known you forever. Dogs, you really love your dogs. So dogs, do you incorporate them into the thrillers as much as you might?
Somebody's pointing out Laszlo is in this book. They have a little dog named Laszlo, and I just put it on my Instagram because it's really cute. There's a meme that always goes around of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at a TV screen like, hey, look what I see. And he had superimposed Laszlo's face over it, saying, when you see Laszlo's name in the book. So, I incorporate a lot of real life stuff. and a lot of Easter eggs from old books. I mean, there's an Easter egg to Win is specifically mentioned in this particular book. Something from the novel Win is in here. I did a lot of the TV shows as well. In The Stranger, someone was staying at the Bolatar Hotel. And there's the Windsor Horn Lockwood parking garage. I like those sort of things. I think that they're fun, and I'm existing in the same world. The character of Hester Crimstein has been in a number of books as a minor character. She finally had a bigger part when I wrote Boy from the Woods and The Match. She got her own sort of book. But certain characters just pop up from time to time, and they don't necessarily want to leave my head.
Well, your real serious character has always been Myron and Wind, so you can hear our dogs going crazy because their dad just came home. Yep, yep, yep. But a huge number of your books are in fact standalones. But it's great that you've created the sort of Coben verse where you can pull in people from other books, and it's fun. It's fun for your readers. So it does create even with the standalones, it does create a kind of universe,
Yep.
written by you. So the only other thing I meant to ask you is, since you have an in-house medical expert in the person of your lovely wife, do you ever feel, do you want to incorporate more medical stuff, or do you steer away from it? Or, is that a boundary between you that you don't like pillage her for?
Oh, no, I exploit it like heck.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about Tell No One, which is the first non-Myronine written in many years, and when I was trying to think of what to make the character, I made him an inner city pediatrician working with the underserved, which is what my wife is. So my research was, honey, what would happen if? So I've had a Dr. Mark Seidman, and No Second Chance was a doctor. I have a lot of doctor characters. In Runaway, the wife is also a pediatrician. So I exploit my wife's knowledge for all it's worth. I don't know if I wrote many, many, many years ago one medical thriller, but I'm not sure I would do that again. But yeah, no, whatever's close to home. My son now works at NASA. He graduated from Rice University last year, and he works in flight control at NASA. So if I can think of a way of exploiting that, he knows Dad is that's what Dad does. Dad exploits this stuff. So.
Murder in the Space Station by Harlan Coben. You got to love it. So Ian, come up and tell us whether we have any questions and all. And I want to mention how wonderful it is for Harlan to be #1 and basically what's his local newspaper, the New York Times. Yay.
Hey, Ian.
Hello. Yes, there are a few questions here. The first one is, any special inspiration for the Max and Sarah characters?
Yeah, Max and Sarah are the FBI agents who are trying to track down our escaped hero. Again, a little bit fugitive-like. They are, I guess, Tommy Lee Jones, that who played in the movie. So, and what's interesting about them is I just did a podcast with Charlie Gibson, who used to be on Good Morning America's daughter, of a new book podcast, Bookcase, and they're both raving. Their favorite part of the book was Max and Sarah. And I said to them, I know how it's going to work. Half the people are going to love Max and Sarah. Half the people are going to hate Max and Sarah. And I'm in for it. I love that. I just don't want you to be indifferent to them. They're fun. They're supposed to be a little bit of comic relief, just a little bit more interesting than just normal FBI agents. They're kooky. They remind me a little bit, if anybody has seen the TV show Stay Close, where I had these Ken and Barbie psycho dancing killers. Half the people love them, half the people hate them, and I love that.
Are there any Myron Bolitar books in the future?
Yeah, we'll announce it here now. The next book is Myron Bolitar. Myron's rides again. He returns to the office where he used to work with Wynn, but his office, if people who read the book Wynn will know, his old office is taken, so he moves up to a higher floor, but he's back in the office. And as the book opens, he's talking on the phone to his parents who have moved down to Florida, retired down to Florida. And his father informs them that Mom and I have discovered edibles. So we'll see how poor Myron deals with that as the book opens. But yeah, Myron.
Let the dogs get
I always hear, I get so many, it was weird. I get angry nice. I'm thrilled people love Myron this much, but like, oh, I just stopped the series. You're not going to write the series. I'm like, when did I say I'm not writing the series anymore? I've never said that. So Myron and Wynn will ride again. First time that there's been a Myron book, I think it'll be 5 or 6 years. So, Wynn's kind of a Myron book without Myron in it. But yeah, they'll be back. Thank you for asking.
Wynn was a wonderful book. Harlan and I
thank
talked about it, and I thought there was all kinds of wonderful stuff in it. And that's one of the great things is that you can have a series like Myron, and then you can develop characters within the Myron series who can then take on shoulder books of their own. How great!
Thank you.
What did you want to be when you grew up, Harlan?
Pro basketball player, but I don't think that was going to happen. I realized at some point I think around sometime my sophomore, junior of high school, and I thought I was pretty good, but I realized I wasn't going to be that good. But then college, I played college basketball, but I was a political science major, which is a euphemism for I have no idea what I want to do. I was pretty lost and adrift. I worked in a family's travel agency while I tried to write. I never really thought writing would work out. I was always too much of a realist. I've always had incremental goals, which I think is I recommend, or incremental ambitions. So originally, back in the 1980s, my dream, if I could just one day have a novel published. Remember, this is before indie publishing or anything like that. But if I just have one novel published and see it in a bookstore, that would be that's all I asked for, just one novel published. And it's like, okay, two novels published just to show it wasn't a fluke. Okay, 3, like, can we just scratch out a living? Doesn't mean any money, just something so I'm not embarrassing myself. Can I just like one day skim a bestseller list? Just one for like 1 hour, just hit it. And then, then eventually it's like, oh, I wonder if I could hit number 1. So it's been gone much better than I ever allowed myself to think. I was in France when I was on book tour last there, and I remember him asking, it's like, so, he was number 1 right now in France. Was this one of your dreams? I'm like, dude, that's so far beyond anything. I was hoping one day to see myself carry my book to France, nonetheless, be even published there. So it's all really worked out much better than I anticipated.
I point out too, because as I say, Harlan and I go back some 30 years, that there was a low kind of entry for some authors way back in the beginning, in that when the small paperback that was sold in drugstores and so forth, it was a very low price, comparatively speaking, was a great way for some people to start. J.A. Jance started that way. Rick Riordan, do you remember Rick won?
Yeah, Rick and I were at the same publisher.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
Bantam, I was Dell, but they were the same house back then.
Yeah, Mark
And
Rainey.
both were paperback originals. So was Laura Lippman, Lisa Scottolini.
Right.
Those are all people who won I'm just trying to think of the people who won around the same time I did, the Edgar for Best Paperback Original. In many ways, I would say the names on that list may be more well-known than the list of Best Novel.
I agree, but I mean, what's wonderful is that it let a lot of people into publishing, whereas today it's harder because there's much more money involved. It's much harder for a first novelist. I think about Mark Rainey. We've been with him since the very beginning. The Gray Man was an original paperback. J.A. Jance was telling me, because I did her guest of honor lifetime achievement interview at Left Coast Crime in Tucson last week, that her first books for J.P. Beaumont in the mid 80s, she made a quarter a book, because they were something like $5.99 and she got paid a whole quarter. So, the idea that you could make a living writing when that was your income stream took a while to develop. So, yeah. But
one thing I would say about that, the defense I was making at that time, which may have just been justification for what was really, financially speaking, a hobby, was that most businesses don't make money their first year, or their first 2 years, or 3 years even. Yeah. So if you believe in yourself and you hope that you're growing a little bit and you can figure a way. Also, I don't think, despite what people say, I don't think most writers, write hoping to get rich. I mean, that's your motivation. Probably should find something has a far greater chance. But the the other thing was also the day that Judy Jantz and I were coming up, there was no internet. And so you could remain wonderfully naive. So even though I was a paperback original author selling, very few copies or whatever else, it was a Dell and it was in a bookstore, and I thought I was the cat's ass. I didn't know I was a pimple on the buttocks of publishing. And if I had, I might have given up, so I was getting enough positive feedback. If I had seen I was ranked 7 million on Amazon when the book comes out, and if you start thinking about the odds, you'll lose your mind. So
yeah, but my point was that it did mean that more people got a chance to get published. And if they, if they did well, I mean, if they wrote wonderful books and acquired readers and so forth, then they could move on. It's much, much harder to do that now when the stakes are so much higher. So I thought, as you point out, there's just an incredible list of authors who, developed their careers.
It let us. I mean, it gave us the time, but at the same time, someone's pointing out to me recently. So when I was at Dell did 2 of them a month, 2 paperback originals a month, 24 a year. And I was doing one every 9 months. So say it was 22 different authors. And of the ones that were there doing the 3 or 4 years I was there, only one other is still published. So it's still, everything isn't winning us another tier lottery ticket. It's a hard business. It's hard to repeat and develop. And you do have to just stick to it and kind of just shut out all the voices of doom and hatred and just sort of be self-hatred and go through it.
Well, you worked hard at it. And, to some degree, the personality of the author and the author's efforts can make a big difference. And Harlan, I used to refer to Harlan as the George Jessel of the mystery world. It was so good. He was, but seriously, you showed up and you were funny and you were generous to other people. And, you worked hard at developing your community, not just with the books, but you worked hard personally to do that and became a personality as separate from an author.
No, that's interesting, but okay.
That's true. That's really true. Right. Anything else, Ian?
Yes. Did you like to read as a child?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I wouldn't be, writers always say so many things that annoy me, but I'm not like, oh, I always had a book in my hand and people called me the bookworm and all of that. Because I was, if you were to ask people who I grew up with, I think I probably would be more well known as a basketball player than as a reader. But I did. I loved when I was a kid the C.S. Lewis Narnia series, Madeline L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time series. I still remember the first time I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl, and you remember it. We all, of course, do. How badly you wanted Charlie to get that ticket. That was writing. I mean, man, you really wanted to get the ticket. Now, as I get older, though, the 4 grandparents who never left bed. That seems really appealing to me. I mean, as I get older, but yeah. So I read a lot as a child, but not like I was always consumed with story of some time, of telling myself stories, of thinking up stories, things of that nature. And books in my house. I've been talking about this a lot because I was asked this not long ago on a show I was on. But books in my house were revered and sacred. We were always allowed to get books. We couldn't always get toys or games or whatever else. And next to both my parents' side of their beds was a stack of books that was constantly tumbling over. Next to my bed and my brother's beds, the same. And on Sundays, when again, we didn't have a ton of money, we would go into New York City, and there was a sales annex there that had like remainder and different kind of books. And they'd give you a brown paper bag, and you'd fill it for $5. And we would spend all day browsing books. And then at the end, my dad would put them in to that brown bag like it was a game of Tetris. I mean, like he was packing a trunk of getting every available space. So I grew up with a love and a reverence of books and story. And for the most part, we all read fiction. We were not big nonfiction readers in my family.
Who do you enjoy reading?
I always hate this question just because I'll leave people out and someone will report it. So I don't really give, but the only thing is, I usually try to find an advanced reader's copy of something that's coming up that you guys should for sure take a look at. And I see behind over Barbara's left-hand shoulder, I just finished Small Mercies by the new Dennis Lehane book, and it's fantastic. I mean, Lehane has been one of my favorite colleagues for many years. We even toured together, and I think it was 97 or 98. No one showed up. To give you an idea how things do nicely change after a while. But his new book, I think it comes out, and Barbara, you know better than I do, April or May, and I'm sure you'll be getting Dennis to sign copies of it.
Well, I've just had an idea. Are you going to the Eggers?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, rats. Because I say that because Dennis is joining me on Zoom, unfortunately, on the day of the Eggers.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you're going right up against it, but yeah, I sent Dennis an email recently because he sent me an advance copy. But yeah, in fact, I was with Dennis at your store together one time. I remember hanging with Patrick one time and Dennis together at one of the Boucher cons or something like that. But anyway, that's the book that I'll recommend right now. But I like the same people that a lot of you guys love, and I don't really, I go on the Today Show, and I'll be on again. I think it's April 4th. I'll be on the Today Show again recommending books.
Great. Yeah. If I could lure you out at like 3 or 4 o'clock on the Edgar Day, would
Maybe.
you like to?
Yeah, if I'm around, sure, why not? I'm not going to be.
I love that. I mean, we're scheduled for long.
It's the first I've been in Edgar, I don't know how many years, but my publishers invited me, and I think I do plan on going, but sure, I'll be happy to do it.
That'd be wonderful. Maybe I can jack it up to noon our time, which should be 3 your time instead of 1 o'clock.
That should work.
Exciting.
We'll discuss it later. Figure out.
Won't be hard at all. I love it. Cool. So, sorry, Ian, anything else? We cut you off.
Nope.
That's it.
One last one here. Have you ever thought about writing in other genres?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I have a couple of different answers for it. One is I never look at mystery, crime fiction, thriller, suspense, whatever we want to call it, as a genre. I know that's weird. I look at it as a form. To me, it's like saying a haiku or a sonata. And within that form, I can and hope I've done everything I want to do in terms of storytelling or revealing the world. Loss, redemption, family, friendship, social themes, the internet, politics, all of that stuff I'm able to do in that novel. What I love about the form, and what I think makes this form so great, and why it sells so well and is so relevant today, is we're still telling a story. If I ask you to name your favorite novels that are 100 years old, all of them contain a crime pretty much, and all of them are stories. So I can't get lost in the beauty of my own genius. I still have to do the tradition of telling you a story. And that's answer one. And answer two, I sort of steal from my buddy Lee Child, who said, it's kind of not my job to give you every reading experience. He's Reacher. That's what he does. You don't want Reacher? Go somewhere else for that book. And so I'm the guy who's going to write suspense. I'm the guy who's going to keep you up at night and twist and turn. I don't think I can turn that part of me off. I do essays. I've written essays on my parents' death that I publish and stuff like that. But for the most part, I don't think I'm going to do a science fiction or romance or even mainstream, but one never knows.
It depends on the idea. I'm going to point out as we're ending up how nifty the title is for this story. I Will Find You is an action title. It is
just trying to change it up, I guess, after a while. I don't think I came up with a title. I think somebody else did. I'm bad with titles. I think I've talked about this before, Barbara. So I take, advice from other people on titles. I would say of my 35 books, I titled maybe 6 or 7 of them have been a title that I came up with. During the writing of it, I was calling it in my head, Prison Break Coben book or Prison Break book, that kind of a thing.
Right. Well, you talked about, that this book is struck such a chord. And I think part of it is really, the dynamic of the title. I Will Find You is, think about it. Harlan, a pleasure. Thank you for.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, everybody who paid attention.
It was wonderful to see you. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Ian, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Take care, everybody.